It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind when you think nothing significant will happen. The kind of day you expect to pass quietly, like most in retirement. I had just brewed a pot of chamomile tea and sat in my reading chair, phone in hand, ready to dial my son. I'd been waiting for Eric to confirm the wedding date. He and Sophie had been engaged for over a year, and every time I asked, it was always soon. This time, Sophie answered. Her voice was clear, too casual, almost smug. "Oh, Marta," she said, "we already got married yesterday. It was just us. And the people who really matter." My ears buzzed, but I caught every syllable. The people who really matter. I stared at the teacup in my other hand, barely able to hold it. The words didn't just sting, they sliced. 3 years. 3 years I'd paid their rent, 5,000 kroner every month, while they got on their feet. I bought their kitchen appliances, their sofa, even the ridiculous neon painting Sophie liked for the hallway. I filled their fridge during the pandemic, brought groceries in the snow, wired money on demand, never asked questions. But I wasn't someone who mattered. I looked up and realized I was sitting in the very same armchair where I'd once sewn a hem for Sophie's engagement dress. The pale pink dress I had chosen for her wedding, soft silk, understated elegance, still hung untouched in my closet, along with the new shoes I bought to match. I'd spent over 2,000 kroner on that outfit, imagining how nice I'd look in the family photos in which I would never appear. Eric didn't even bother taking the phone. I could hear his voice faintly in the background, mumbling something to Sophie, avoiding me, letting her do the dirty work. For weeks, I had made mental checklists. I set aside 10,000 kroner to give them as a wedding gift. I'd scrubbed every inch of the house, expecting maybe they'd stop by for a celebration. I had even called my sister Elsa in Gothenburg to share the good news. Eric's finally getting married, and they're including me in everything. I felt foolish. I had imagined toasts, hugs, the warm swell of pride as a mother. Instead, I saw Sophie lounging on the sofa I paid for, scrolling through her phone, legs tucked under her like a queen visiting her own castle. Later that night, I did something I hadn't planned. I opened Instagram. There they were, dozens of photos, Sophie in a lavish designer gown, not the simple one I helped her buy last month with the extra spending money. Eric in a fitted tuxedo, smiling nervously. Sophie's parents beaming. Her sister holding champagne, a rented hall, dozens of guests. I saw it all. It was never a small ceremony. It was never intimate. It was selective, and I had been deliberately excluded. And as I scrolled through their photos, my own carefully picked pink dress stared at me from the corner of my room, still cloaked in plastic. I had no appetite for dinner. I couldn't even finish my tea. I sat in silence, trying to understand what kind of person my son had become. Or perhaps, what kind of mother I had been to raise a man who could erase me from his life's biggest moment without flinching. Outside it had started to snow. I stood at the window watching flakes gather on the street, numb to the cold, to everything. There would be no wedding reception in my home, no hugs, no joy. Only one message, loud and clear. I was not one of the meaningful people. Exactly 7 days later, my phone rang just before noon. The name flashed across the screen like a bad omen, Sophie. I let it ring once, twice, a third time. Then curiosity, or perhaps spite, got the better of me. I answered. Her voice was no longer smug. It trembled, urgent, desperate. "Marta, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Listen, the rent is overdue. The landlord is threatening to evict us. You must have forgotten to make the transfer this month." She said it so casually, like we were partners in some shared financial arrangement, like I was late on a utility bill for my own apartment. I didn't speak. I let the silence weigh heavy between us. I wanted her to feel the full weight of it. "Are you still there?" she asked, voice tighter now. I imagined her pacing around the flat, probably barefoot, holding a smoothie, standing next to the refrigerator I'd filled for them more times than I could count. I thought about every time I canceled my own hair appointments to send her money for emergencies, which always seemed to involve new shoes, yoga classes, or brunches with her sister. "Didn't I tell you?" I said slowly. "I only help meaningful people?" Silence. This time hers. "Marta," she stammered, "I don't understand. We've always been special to you. You used to call me your daughter." "Yes," I said, "I used to." I could almost hear her swallow, hard. Her entire act, fragile, sweet, baby-voiced when she wanted something, was cracking. But I wasn't finished. "Do you know what I realized this week, Sophie? That for 3 years I've lived like a background character in my own life. I gave and hoped for crumbs. You and Eric took 5,000 kroner from me every month for rent. Another 2,000 here and there for food, furniture, repairs, unexpected expenses. Your honeymoon fund, which you said you weren't even going to use yet. That's over 385,000 kroner I've spent. Do you know how much that is?" She was quiet, so I continued. "That was my retirement cushion. The money Robert left me to live with dignity. And what do I get in return? No seat at your wedding, not even a courtesy call. You married my son and made me a ghost." "Marta, please. We made a mistake, okay? Eric and we didn't think it would mean that much to you. You said you didn't like crowds. We thought—" "No," I cut in. "You thought I was too convenient to matter." There was a pause. I could tell she was trying to shift her strategy. "Look, I don't want to fight. Can't we just talk? Maybe we could come over this weekend and—" Click. I ended the call before she could finish. I didn't want to hear her beg, or worse, pretend to care. I was done paying for the illusion of love. That evening, I sat at the small kitchen table where I'd once helped Eric with his schoolwork, where I'd budgeted every expense, every gift, every bank transfer. I pulled out my folders, my calculator, and started writing it all down. Write-int. 5,000 SEK times 36 months equals 180,000. Rections. Average 2,000 per month equals 72,000. Abolishes holidays, anniversaries, 30,000. Motsifi's personal fund, 10,000. Moneymoon, 15,000. Medical expenses, 8,000. Furniture and appliances, 35,000. Playback, emergencies, odd favors, 35,000. Total, 385,000 SEK. I stared at the number. Then again. I had known, but I hadn't known. That number represented my dreams, trips not taken, clothes never bought, evenings alone while they celebrated birthdays I wasn't invited to. For a moment, I felt the urge to cry, but nothing came, only the steady thrum of rage and the shocking realization that, after everything, I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt awake. I slept that night without checking my phone. I didn't imagine an apology was coming, and if it was, it would be attached to another request. For the first time in years, I didn't feel needed, and it felt like peace. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, not the kind that comes after a good sleep, but the kind that surfaces after a slow, grueling burn finally breaks into fire. I boiled water for coffee and stared out the window as the snow continued to fall in soft, tired flurries. There was something symbolic in that quiet descent, like the ashes of a former life finally settling. Then I opened the drawer beneath my calendar and took out the bank card I'd used for years to transfer funds to Eric and Sophie. I held it for a moment, almost tenderly. It was worn, the numbers barely visible. It had been swiped, tapped, and keyed into more online gift registries and mobile transfers than I cared to count. By 10 a.m., I was standing in the office of Mr. Halverson, the bank manager who'd known me since Robert passed. He smiled gently as I entered. "Mrs. Berglund, always a pleasure. Another transfer for your son and daughter-in-law?" "Not this time," I replied, placing the card and papers on his desk. "I'm here to cancel everything, and I want safeguards on my accounts. No one but me should be able to touch a single krona." His smile faded, replaced by something more solemn. "Are you sure?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We spent the next hour locking down every avenue Eric and Sophie had once used. I signed forms, revoked authorizations, and added passwords that only I knew. Mr. Halverson, always discreet, looked at me with a rare kindness as he handed me the final document. "I don't usually say this," he murmured, "but I hope you start doing something for yourself now. I've seen your account bleed month after month. You deserve more." His words felt like a balm and a rebuke. A stranger saw what I had refused to see. Outside, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked to the locksmith's shop around the corner. Mr. Pollard ran it, a stout man with white stubble and a direct manner. I'd been there dozens of times before, always picking up keys for Sophie's flat, getting spare copies made when she lost hers, sometimes even footing the bill when she forgot her wallet. But this time was different. "New locks," I said, "for every door, and none of the old keys will work." Mr. Pollard raised an eyebrow. "Security issue?" "You could say that." He nodded. "We'll get it done tomorrow. Want cameras too? My son Julian installs full systems, motion detection, cloud backup, remote access from your phone." I hesitated only a second. Yes, everything. That night, I found myself on the porch with a steaming mug of mint tea. I was going through the motions of relaxation, but inside, I was sharpening something. My resolve, my boundaries, maybe even a version of myself I'd buried long ago. Just then, a soft voice startled me from the darkness. "Mrs. Berglund?" I turned to see a woman bundled in a dark blue coat standing at the edge of my steps. Short gray curls peeked from beneath her knit hat. "I'm Claudine," she said. "I live next door. We've never really talked, but yesterday I heard shouting. I didn't want to intrude, just wanted to check that you're okay." The kindness in her voice unraveled something in me I hadn't expected. I motioned for her to come up. "Would you like a cup of tea?" Inside, we sat in the living room that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and heartbreak. I told her the story, at least the parts I could say out loud without choking. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "You know, 5 years ago my daughter did the same. Used guilt like it was currency. When I stopped paying, she vanished. For a while. But I survived. And now we actually talk like people again. You can come out on the other side." It was the first time in days that I let myself feel something close to hope. As Claudine left, she smiled softly. "Don't ever feel bad for locking your door, Marta. Sometimes keeping people out is the only way to let yourself back in." I slept that night with my door bolted tight, and for the first time in years I dreamed of my own life, not theirs. The locks were changed by noon the next day. Mr. Pollard's team worked quickly, efficiently. Gone were the cheap brass knobs Eric had once insisted were fine for now. In their place, solid steel deadbolts with anti-pick features clicked into place like armor. Julian arrived soon after, arms full of smart cameras and wiring. He set up the control center through an app on my phone. Now, with a glance, I could see the front porch, the side gate, the back entrance, even the hallway inside. I hadn't realized how vulnerable I'd felt, until I didn't anymore. By the time they left, my home had become a fortress. I spent that evening in the kitchen, baking cinnamon rolls for no one but myself. The smell filled the house. It reminded me of when Eric was small, before Sophie, before the entitlement, when a roll of dough and a hug were enough to make him laugh. Around 8:30, just as I was cleaning up, my phone buzzed. A notification from the security app. Motion detected at front door. I tapped the screen. 3 figures. Eric, Sophie, and a man I didn't recognize. Bald, thin-framed, in a dark coat with a briefcase. My stomach dropped. They had keys. Of course they had keys. I'd given them copies years ago, in case of emergencies. I had never imagined they'd be the emergency. I slipped on my shoes and coat, steadied my breath, and approached the front steps. My hand paused on the doorknob. Inside, through the peephole, I could see them. Sophie pacing like a lioness in a cage, her heels clicking across my wood floors. Eric sat on the couch, head in hands, looking like a sulking child. The third man, his briefcase now open, was rifling through my paperwork spread across the dining table. My personal documents. I flung the door open. All three turned. Sophie was the first to speak, her tone instantly rehearsed. "Marta, thank God. We needed to talk to you face to face. You haven't been answering because I didn't want to talk to you." The man with the briefcase stepped forward, offering a tight, polished smile. "Mrs. Berglund, I'm Dr. Brandt. I'm a family attorney. Your children have asked me to assist you in a delicate legal matter concerning your well-being." I didn't take his hand. "What are you doing in my house?" Eric stood up. "Mom, we're worried. You've been erratic. You cut off our financial support, ignored us, changed the locks, installed cameras. This isn't normal behavior." My voice was steady. "It's not normal for a 35-year-old man to live off his mother," Sophie interjected, her voice dripping with saccharine condescension. "We know this must be hard for you. Loneliness at your age can cause episodes of confusion. We just want to help." That word again, help. I walked past them to the dining table and calmly gathered my papers into a stack. "These are private. You had no right." Dr. Brandt placed a folder in front of me. "This is a preliminary draft of a power of attorney. If you sign it, Eric and Sophie can manage your financial decisions, just until you feel stable again. It's for your protection." "You think I'm unstable because I stopped funding your lifestyle?" Eric's voice rose, defensive. "That's not fair, Mom. We've always appreciated what you did for us." "You appreciated the money, never me." Sophie moved closer, hands out as if approaching a wounded animal. "We're your family. Everything you have will be ours one day anyway. We're just managing it now." There it was, the truth finally said aloud. To them, I was already dead. I took the folder, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it directly into the trash. "I want you all out of my house, now." Dr. Brandt's tone turned steely. "Mrs. Berglund, if you refuse support, there are legal channels your family can pursue. If you're mentally unfit, a court can assign guardianship." Sophie looked smug. Eric wouldn't meet my gaze. "Then let them," I said. "But you'll have to prove I'm insane just because I stopped being your retirement plan." They didn't leave immediately. Sophie cried. Eric tried one last soft voice. "Mom, this is going to end badly. For you. You'll be alone." "No," I replied, opening the door wide. "Now, I'm just finally alone by choice." And I shut it behind them. The cameras recorded every second. 3 days passed in silence. No calls, no texts, no doorbell. The kind of silence that feels like the air itself is bracing for something to snap. I filled the time with small acts of rebellion, reclaiming rituals that had once belonged to me. I went to the old flea market near Normand and bought a delicate porcelain teacup with blue forget-me-nots. For me. I read late into the night, slept in past dawn, rearranged the living room furniture, not for guests, not for appearances, for myself. But I knew it wouldn't last. On Friday morning, just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee, the doorbell rang. The security app pinged first. Unknown woman, mid-30s, clipboard, government badge. I knew instantly. Bureaucracy had arrived. I opened the door just enough to see the woman's ID. "Good morning," she said in fluent Swedish, with a bureaucratic brightness that was practiced, not real. "I'm social investigator Ingrid Schmidt from Eldra Förvaltningen, the Senior Services Office. We've received a report expressing concern about your well-being. May I come in?" My jaw tightened. "Who filed the report?" "I'm not authorized to disclose that, but we are obligated to perform a wellness check when mental or physical vulnerability is suspected." There it was, vulnerability, a word used to pry open locked doors. I didn't move. "This is a legal matter now. I won't answer any questions without my attorney." She blinked, taken aback. "Mrs. Berglund, this isn't a legal interrogation." "No," I said. "It's worse. It's a trap disguised as concern." For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe even sympathy. But she pressed on. "The report included some very specific points. That you've recently isolated yourself, that you're behaving paranoid, installing excessive security systems, changing your locks abruptly, cutting off contact with close family." I smiled thinly. "Is that so? Funny how those exact words sound like they came straight from Sophie." She didn't confirm, of course, just said, "May I please come inside? If you refuse, it may raise a red flag." I let her in. I had nothing to hide, but I had everything to defend. We sat in the kitchen, and she placed a form on the table, carefully uncapping a pen like a doctor preparing an injection. She began, "Do you manage your own finances?" "I've managed them for over 40 years, without a single overdraft." "Do you live alone?" "Yes, peacefully, until recently." "Do you drive?" "Yes." "Do you take any medications?" "Just a multivitamin and some aspirin if my joints ache." She paused. "Why did you stop financial support for your son?" There it was, the real question. I looked her square in the eyes. "Because I was being exploited, emotionally, financially, and I refuse to enable it any longer." She nodded slowly, jotting down a note. "And the surveillance system?" "For protection. They broke into my house, went through my personal papers, brought a lawyer to try and pressure me into signing my rights away." Her pen hesitated. "Do you have legal representation?" "Yes, Mrs. Ingrid Anders from Elder Rights Council. She's already preparing documentation." Before the conversation could go further, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was my lawyer. Mrs. Anders stepped into the kitchen like a general entering enemy territory. "Good morning, Miss Schmidt," she said, cool but cordial. "I understand a report was filed. I'd like to see a copy of it." Miss Schmidt hesitated. "That's confidential." "Then let me be clear," Mrs. Anders said, placing her own folder on the table. "My client is under legal protection. Any further attempts to investigate her without court orders will be considered harassment. We also have audio and video evidence of unauthorized entries, emotional manipulation, and financial coercion from the so-called concerned family members." Miss Schmidt looked shaken. "I didn't know that." "Well," Mrs. Anders said, "you do now." To her credit, Miss Schmidt remained professional. She reviewed Marta's statements again in light of the new information, then stood up. "Mrs. Berglund," she said with a voice noticeably less confident, "from what I've observed, you are fully competent. I see no cause for concern. This case will be closed." After she left, Mrs. Anders turned to me with a quiet intensity. "That was a probe. They're testing the waters before filing for guardianship." "They'll fail," I said, but my voice shook. "They'll try everything, Marta," she replied gently. "They won't stop just because it's wrong. They'll stop when it's impossible." That afternoon, I walked around my home, touching each door, each lock, each piece of paper I had once left vulnerable. They had tried to steal my autonomy, but they forgot one thing. I had just begun to fight. The official court letter arrived on a Tuesday. I'd been organizing the linen cupboard, one of those mundane chores that used to feel like a task for someone else's life, until I began reclaiming mine. The envelope was thick, government stamped, my name in cold black ink across the front. Inside, a formal notice from Stockholm's family court. Petition for court-appointed guardianship filed by Erik Berglund and Sophie Lund. Claim: Marta Berglund exhibits patterns of irrational decision-making, cognitive decline, social paranoia, and financial mismanagement that pose a risk to her health and property. There it was, in print. My own son and his wife were attempting to have the state declare me incompetent, to take full control of everything I had worked for, saved, earned, and sacrificed. I sat down slowly, the paper trembling in my hand, but not from fear, from rage. I called Mrs. Anders immediately. Her voice was calm but firm. "We knew this was coming. We have 2 weeks to file an official response and prepare your defense." "What do I need to do?" "Everything you've already started. Documentation, witness testimony, and most importantly, a professional cognitive evaluation. Voluntary, from a source we trust." I agreed. I wasn't afraid of being examined. I was afraid of not being heard. The next morning, we visited Dr. Ingrid Lang, a sharp, perceptive psychiatrist who had worked with elder law cases before. Her office was warmly lit, not clinical, full of books, paintings, and not a single ticking clock. I liked her immediately. "I want you to be comfortable," she said, inviting me to the leather armchair. "This isn't a test, it's a truth-finding mission." We spoke for nearly 2 hours. She asked about my memory, my finances, my routines. I solved logical puzzles, recited dates, explained my decisions. I even showed her my bank records and recent journals to demonstrate my awareness. "Mrs. Berglund," she said finally, "you are not only competent, you're exceptional. It's clear you've undergone recent trauma, but mentally, you are as sound as any adult half your age." That gave me strength, but the war was just beginning. Over the next few days, Mrs. Anders and I dug into the evidence Eric and Sophie had submitted. They'd managed to get statements from 3 people. First, a pharmacist named Mr. Mickelson, who had written that I displayed erratic medication habits. But I recognized the name. He ran the pharmacy near Sophie's old flat. I hadn't filled a prescription there in years. We paid him a visit. He was startled to see us. "Mrs. Berglund, I didn't expect you. You wrote that I hoarded medication and refused necessary treatment. On what grounds?" He hesitated. "Your daughter-in-law, Sophie, yes? She came in a few weeks ago and asked for a statement, said you weren't taking your prescriptions and that she needed a letter for your health insurance." Mrs. Anders' voice hardened. "Did you verify any of that?" No. She seemed very convincing, and I assumed you signed a document for a lawsuit, not an insurance form." His face drained of color. We left with a new statement, a full retraction, clarifying that he had no medical concern and had never personally interacted with me as a patient. Second, Mr. Heller, the neighbor across the street, a bitter man with an opinion on everything, from barking dogs to how women should water their lawns. When we knocked on his door, he opened with a sneer. "Oh, the victim arrives." Mrs. Anders remained neutral. "Mr. Heller, you signed a statement claiming Mrs. Berglund was behaving irrationally. Would you care to elaborate?" He puffed out his chest. "She changed her locks, got cameras everywhere, paranoid, had strangers over at all hours. What kind of old lady does that?" "I had friends over," I snapped, "and I changed my locks to keep criminals out, not to keep secrets in." "Same thing," he muttered, slamming the door. "Well," Mrs. Anders said dryly as we walked away, "he'll look very credible under cross-examination." The third statement was from Sophie herself. Pages of carefully worded manipulations. She wrote that I was disoriented, emotionally volatile, easily influenced by strangers, and unable to distinguish truth from fantasy. No mention, of course, of the wedding I wasn't invited to. No confession about draining nearly 500,000 kroner from me over the years. "She's playing the long game," Mrs. Anders said, flipping through the pages. "They don't want your love. They want your legal surrender. They'll never get it." That evening, Claudine invited me to her house again. Over a warm cinnamon bun and cardamom coffee, I told her everything. She didn't blink. "Let them bring their lies. You have the truth, and you're not the only one anymore." I looked at her, confused. "I spoke with the others," she continued. "Lucia from the salon, Mr. Pollard, Julian, even some of the women from our garden group. We'll testify, every single one of us. We've watched you become stronger, not weaker." My hands trembled again, but this time not with fear, with hope. The people who really mattered were finally stepping forward. It was early spring when the court date arrived, one of those chilly Stockholm mornings where the air smells like wet granite and thawing earth. I dressed with care, black wool slacks, a fitted blazer, my mother's silver brooch pinned just above my heart. Not mourning clothes, not humble, armor. Mrs. Anders picked me up at 8:30 sharp. We said little on the drive. She knew I needed silence, the kind you sit inside like a chapel before battle. The courthouse loomed gray and massive. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed like flies over rotting intentions. Eric was already there, sitting on the bench with Sophie. He wore a tailored navy suit, expensive, probably paid for with one of the final transfers I'd made before I cut them off. Sophie wore a high-necked black dress and pearl earrings, as if dressing for my funeral. They didn't look at me, but I looked at them. I studied my son's profile, his jaw clenched in a way I remembered from childhood tantrums. I used to soothe that expression with hugs and patience. Now I watched it grow cold and unrecognizable. We entered the courtroom. The judge, a man in his late 50s named Judge Morton Hallstrom, presided with the kind of bored authority that only comes from years of wading through other people's filth. But his eyes were sharp. Eric and Sophie's attorney, a crisp-tongued man named Mr. Nilsson, began the opening statement. Your Honor, this is not about greed. This is about protection. Our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Berglund, have grave concerns for the mental welfare of Mrs. Marta Berglund. In recent months, she has isolated herself, refused contact with family, displayed paranoid behaviors, and shown signs of cognitive deterioration. We request guardianship to ensure she is safe, supported, and protected from manipulation. Lies, all draped in the silky language of concern. Then came their witnesses. First, Sophie. She took the stand with the poise of a trained actress. She bid at her eyes with a tissue, voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. Marta's been like a mother to me, she said, but lately she's changed. She's suspicious of everyone, accuses us of terrible things. She's locked herself away. We just want her to be safe. Mrs. Anders cross-examined her without flinching. Mrs. Berglund, do you recall telling my client that only meaningful people were invited to your wedding? Sophie blinked. That's out of context. What is the correct context for telling a woman who bought your wedding dress that she isn't meaningful? No answer. Did you use Marta's money to pay for your honeymoon? Sophie hesitated. She offered. She didn't attend the wedding. We had limited space. No photographs show limitations, only exclusions. Sophie fumbled. Her voice cracked. The judge made notes. Next, Eric. He sat straighter, trying to look rational, composed. My mother is a generous woman, he said, but lately she's refused all contact. She cut off our rent support with no warning. She's let strangers influence her. We don't want her to be exploited. Mrs. Anders stood. Mr. Berglund, how old are you? 35. How long have you relied on your mother to pay your rent? He faltered. 3 years, temporarily. Did you ever invite her to your wedding? It was small. Did your wife's family attend? He nodded. Why not your mother? He shifted. There were tensions. Would you like me to read the message your wife sent to Marta, referring to only meaningful people? Eric looked down. His silence said more than words. Finally, Mr. Heller, the neighbor. He ranted about old ladies with cameras, unusual visitors, and unnecessary drama. But when asked whether he had spoken to me personally, he admitted, no, I've never talked to her directly, just seen things. The judge seemed unimpressed. Then came our turn. First, Dr. Lang. She presented my cognitive tests, scored in the 97th percentile for my age group. There is no clinical indication of cognitive decline. In fact, she added, Mrs. Berglund exhibits strong executive function and emotional clarity. Her recent behavior is consistent with someone setting long overdue boundaries. Next, Mr. Mickelson, the pharmacist, explained how Sophie had misled him into signing a letter. He retracted it fully. The judge raised an eyebrow. Lucia, my hairdresser, testified. She never forgot appointments, never got confused. In fact, she started booking more now that she had time for herself. Mr. Pollard, the locksmith, testified. She asked for high-security locks after a break-in by her own family. Seemed damn rational to me. Then came Claudine. She stood, elegant in a navy coat, and spoke clearly. "I've lived next to Marta for 10 years. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said she was fading, tired, invisible, depleted. But now, she's alive, smart, funny, strong. The only thing that changed was who she stopped giving to. Finally, it was my turn. I stood slowly, no cane, no help. I took the stand and met the judge's eyes. I raised Eric alone. After my husband died, I built our lives from the ground up. I saved, scrimped, denied myself comfort so he could have what he needed. When he met Sophie, I welcomed her like a daughter. I paid for their food, their rent, their wedding, even though I was never invited. And when I stopped, when I finally said no, they decided I must be sick. My voice didn't shake, it rang. This is not a hearing about mental health. It's about control. And I will not surrender my life, my name, or my home to people who only valued my bank account. When I stepped down, I saw Sophie clenching her fists. Eric looked hollow. Judge Hallstrom retired to deliberate. 2 hours passed. When he returned, he didn't hesitate. After reviewing all evidence, it is this court's determination that Mrs. Marta Berglund is fully mentally competent. The petition for guardianship is denied in full. I exhaled. The room spun with the weight that finally lifted. Outside the courtroom, Claudine hugged me. "You didn't just win," she whispered. "You survived." And in that moment I realized I hadn't just protected my freedom, I'd reclaimed my life. 3 weeks later, I packed the last of my boxes in quiet satisfaction. The apartment I had called home for over 30 years stood bare, no longer a place filled with memories, but a battlefield I had conquered. The garden outside was still in bloom, tulips and daffodils lifting their heads without a clue of what had unfolded inside these walls. It was poetic in a way. Nature kept moving, and now so would I. I sold the house 2 days after the court ruling. I knew that if I stayed, Eric and Sophie would keep circling, waiting for the next opportunity, the next weak moment, but I had none left for them. I moved into a sunlit flat near Gamlestan, the old town of Stockholm. Quiet, cobbled streets, fresh bread smells from nearby bakeries, art galleries and flower carts instead of surveillance cameras and threats. The first thing I did was take a trip. Venice, a city I had dreamed of visiting since I was a girl. I wandered canals in silence, sketched gondolas at dusk, drank espresso in crowded squares where no one knew my name. I didn't think of Eric. I didn't check my phone. I didn't even bring it half the time. Back in Stockholm, I enrolled in a painting class. Every Thursday afternoon, I sat with women half my age and painted flowers that didn't need watering, landscapes that didn't need pruning. Just color and movement and time. Mine. Finally mine. I also began volunteering with a nonprofit for elder abuse survivors. I met others like me, women who had mistaken obligation for love, who were made to feel insane for choosing themselves. I shared my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had taken her power back. I never heard from Eric or Sophie again, not directly. Through a friend, I learned they'd moved into a smaller flat outside the city. Sophie had taken a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic. Eric was doing IT freelance work. For the first time in their marriage, they were earning what they spent. It made me neither happy nor sad, just still. Some nights, I sit on my small balcony with a glass of wine and look out over the roofs of the old city. I watch the glow of lanterns flickering in the windows across the alley, the bells from Storkirken ringing the hour. I feel nothing missing. Once, I might have thought I had failed as a mother, that loving your child means sacrificing endlessly, folding yourself smaller and smaller until you fit into their needs. But I was wrong. Love without respect is servitude, and parenthood without boundaries is a prison. Now, when I think of Eric, I don't think of the child I raised, or even the man he's become. I think of the final words I spoke in court, words I carry with me like a shield. I am not confused. I am not sick. I am not a burden. I am a person. I am not yours to manage, fix, or take from. I am mine. Claudine visits often. Lucia still does my hair. We've created a sisterhood of our own, women who escaped the roles others tried to script for us. I sometimes wonder if Eric ever understood what he lost, not just the money, but me. Not the ATM, not the convenience, but the woman who sang him to sleep when he had the flu, who cut out coupons to afford his textbooks, who never once made him feel like a burden. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but I no longer need him to. My name is Marta Berglund. I am 72 years old. I live alone. I love my life, and I will never again apologize for choosing myself.